The official records of 1974 speak of the global oil crisis, the resignation of a president, and the simmering tensions of a world divided by the Iron Curtain. But what the archives of the Department of Defense omit is the incident at Sector 7G, a desolate stretch of the Greenland ice sheet where the silence is so absolute it can drive a man to madness. This was the site of Project Nightglass, a military operation that was never supposed to exist, hunting for a signal that defied the laws of every known science. It was here that the Cold War stopped being a battle of ideologies and became a desperate struggle for the survival of the human species against an entity that did not recognize our borders, our flags, or our right to exist. The project began with a fluke. A high-altitude reconnaissance flight, equipped with experimental deep-ground penetrating radar designed to find Soviet submarine pens beneath the ice, caught a glimpse of something impossible. At 300 meters below the permafrost, there was a void. It wasn't a cavern or a pocket of volcanic gas. It was a perfect geometric shape, a teardrop of absolute blackness that seemed to be absorbing the radar waves rather than reflecting them. General Silas Vance, a man whose soul had been forged in the fires of the Pacific Theater and hardened by the secrets of the Pentagon, looked at the radar plates and knew immediately that this was not a natural formation. He saw a weapon. Or perhaps, more accurately, he saw the ultimate tactical advantage. By the time the first transport planes landed on the ice, the atmosphere at Sector 7G was already thick with an unnatural dread. The engineers, veterans of the most classified bunkers in the Nevada desert, began to drill. They expected ice, granite, and perhaps the occasional pocket of ancient methane. What they found was a physical impossibility. As the diamond-tipped drills reached the 200-meter mark, the temperature didn't drop, it began to rise. The ice around the borehole started to sublimate, turning directly into a thick, violet-tinted mist that smelled of ozone and scorched earth. The men complained of a low-frequency hum that vibrated in their teeth, a sound that the sensors could not pick up but that their nervous systems felt with terrifying clarity. Captain Elias Thorne, the military lead for the excavation, was the first to realize that the anomaly was reacting to their presence. Thorne was a man of cold logic, a strategist who believed every problem had a kinetic solution. But as he stood on the edge of the primary shaft, watching the violet steam rise into the Arctic night, his logic began to fail him. The humming grew louder as they descended. It wasn't a mechanical noise. It was rhythmic, like a colossal heart beating in the depths of the earth. When the final layer of ice was cleared, the floodlights revealed the obsidian structure. It was 30 meters tall, a polished, seamless monolith that seemed to pull the light out of the air. It was not made of metal, stone, or plastic. It felt like frozen shadow. The tactical implications were immediate. If the Soviets found this first, they wouldn't just have a new bomb, they would have a technology that operated outside the electromagnetic spectrum. Thorne ordered the perimeter secured with a triple layer of automated sentry guns and a detachment of soldiers sworn to a level of secrecy that meant they no longer officially existed. They were ghosts guarding a nightmare. The scientists, led by a brilliant but increasingly unstable physicist named Dr. Aris Miller, began to run tests on the obsidian surface. They fired lasers at it, the beams vanished. They tried to chip a sample, the steel shattered like glass. The object was not just indestructible, it was indifferent to human physics. On the sixth night, the first communication occurred. It was not a radio signal, though every receiver in a 50-mile radius began to scream with a sound like 1,000 languages being played backward at once. The communication happened inside the minds of the personnel. Men woke up screaming, claiming they had seen the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. Some began to draw complex star maps on the walls of their barracks using their own blood. Others simply stopped speaking, their eyes turning a dull, reflective silver. Thorne found Dr. Miller in the primary lab, staring at a monitor that was showing nothing but static. Yet Miller was weeping with joy. "It's not an object, Captain," Miller had whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifying fervor. "It's a bridge. We thought we were digging for a secret, but we were just knocking on a door. And something on the other side has been waiting for us to find the key." Thorne didn't care about bridges or doors. He cared about the reports coming from Washington. The Soviet Union had moved 3 of their most advanced nuclear submarines into the North Atlantic, and their long-range bombers were performing aggressive maneuvers just outside Greenland's airspace. The Kremlin knew something was happening in Sector 7G. They had their own psychics, their own remote viewers, and their own sensors that had picked up the massive gravitational spike the obsidian structure was emitting. The Cold War was about to turn white-hot over a piece of technology that nobody understood. As the tension outside reached a breaking point, the situation inside the base spiraled into chaos. The low-frequency hum had become a physical weight, pressing down on the lungs of every man in the facility. Thorne took a security team down to the chamber, intending to shut down the power to the scanners, thinking the energy was feeding the anomaly. But as they entered the cavern, they saw that the obsidian structure was no longer dormant. It was translucent now, glowing with an inner light that revealed shapes moving within the darkness. They weren't human shapes. They were spindly, multifaceted silhouettes that moved with a fluid, terrifying grace. Thorne raised his sidearm, his training taking over where his courage failed. "Miller, step away from the structure." "That's an order." But Miller didn't move. He was standing inches away from the obsidian skin, his hands pressed against the surface. Where his flesh touched the anomaly, it seemed to be merging. The violet mist was now pouring out of Miller's mouth and eyes. He turned to look at Thorne, and for a brief second, the captain saw not his friend, but a vast empty void where a soul should be. "The strategy has changed, Elias." The thing that was once Miller said, its voice resonating through the very walls of the cavern. "The war you are fighting for this world is over. We are not interested in your borders. We are interested in your biology. You are the fuel for the long journey home." Outside, the first Soviet reconnaissance flare lit up the sky. The Russian paratroopers were dropping into the blizzard, their mission clear: capture the anomaly or destroy it. But as the first bullets began to fly in the sub-zero wind, a massive pulse of energy erupted from the shaft. It wasn't an explosion. It was a ripple in reality. For a distance of 10 miles, the laws of gravity simply ceased to function. Soldiers, tanks, and the very snow itself began to drift upward into the darkening sky. And from the obsidian structure, the first of the others stepped out into the biting cold of 1974. They didn't use weapons. They didn't need them. They simply looked at the world and began to rewrite it. Thorne felt himself being lifted off the ground, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched as the Soviet soldiers and his own men were suspended in the air, helpless as the multifaceted entities drifted toward them. This was the true face of the Cold War. A secret kept so deep that even the leaders of the superpowers didn't know the full extent of the horror they had invited. The project was called Nightglass because it was a mirror, and for the first time in human history, we were seeing what was looking back at us from the dark. The obsidian structure began to expand, its teardrop shape unfolding like a geometric flower. It wasn't just a receiver or a bridge, it was a terraforming engine. The ice beneath their feet began to turn into a black, crystalline substance that spread across the landscape like a virus. The temperature began to rise rapidly, the Arctic cold replaced by a humid, sulfurous heat that belonged on a different planet. Thorne realized then that the military strategy had been flawed from the beginning. You cannot fight an enemy that views your entire planet as nothing more than raw materials for a construction project. As he drifted higher, Thorne saw the Soviet bombers in the distance, their engines stalling as the very air they flew through was transformed into something unbreathable. He saw the flashes of light as the nuclear silos in the United States and Russia received a signal sent by the anomaly itself, mimicking the launch codes of both nations. The others weren't just invading, they were cleaning the house. They were using our own paranoia and our own weapons to erase us, making room for whatever was coming next. Thorne closed his eyes as the violet light consumed his vision. He thought of the world he was leaving behind, a world of simple wars and human greed. It seemed so small now, so insignificant in the face of the cosmic horror that had been hidden under the ice for eons. The signal wasn't a cry for help. It was a dinner bell. And the guests had finally arrived. The transition was not violent, it was surgical. As Captain Elias Thorne hovered in the gravity-defying field of Sector 7G, he witnessed the total collapse of the world he had spent his life defending. The violet pulse that erupted from the obsidian structure had done more than just disable machinery. It had begun to rewrite the fundamental laws of the local environment. Below him, the black crystalline growth, the terraforming engine, was devouring the Greenland ice at a rate of miles per second. It didn't melt the ice, it converted it. The water molecules were being disassembled at an atomic level and reconfigured into a dark, semi-sentient substance that pulsed with a low, rhythmic thrum. This was the Buzkashi Protocol in its final, terrifying stage. A military contingency that had assumed the enemy would be human, only to find that the enemy was the very fabric of existence. High above, the Soviet reconnaissance flares were frozen in mid-air, their magnesium burn suspended in a bubble of distorted time. The Russian paratroopers who had been dropping into the combat zone were no longer falling. They were drifting like spores in a slow-motion nightmare, their faces contorted behind their oxygen masks as they realized their parachutes were useless in a world without gravity. Thorne watched as one of the others drifted toward a suspended Soviet soldier. The entity did not have a face in the human sense. It was a shifting mosaic of iridescent scales and translucent limbs that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. As it touched the soldier, the man didn't scream. He simply unraveled. His body turned into a stream of silver data, a literal cloud of information that the entity inhaled through its multifaceted skin. They weren't just killing the soldiers. They were harvesting their experiences, their memories, and their genetic code. In the command bunker, which was now tilting at a 45-degree angle as the ground beneath it transformed, the alarms had shifted from a rhythmic blare to a mournful, continuous wail. The remaining staff were huddled in the corners, watching their instruments melt into puddles of glowing liquid. General Vance, ever the soldier, was still trying to reach the Pentagon through a secure satellite link. But the satellites were gone. The Anomaly had extended a spear of localized gravity into the upper atmosphere, plucking the eyes of the superpower from the sky like low-hanging fruit. The world was going blind, and in that darkness the others were working with terrifying efficiency. "Captain Thorne, can you hear me?" A voice crackled in Thorne's ear. It was Miller. Or at least it was the frequency Miller used. The physicist was no longer in the cavern. His physical form had been integrated into the obsidian structure, and his voice now sounded like it was being broadcast from the heart of a dying sun. "Stop fighting the ascent, Elias. The gravity is a gift. It is the only thing keeping your lungs from collapsing as the atmosphere changes. Look at the sky. Look at what we've invited." Thorne forced his head up. The sky was no longer the deep black of the Arctic night. It was a swirling vortex of bruised purples and sickly greens. A massive rift had opened in the ionosphere, a doorway that dwarfed the obsidian structure below. Through the rift, Thorne could see the silhouettes of gargantuan ships, vessels the size of small moons, constructed from the same shadow matter as the Anomaly. They weren't coming to land. They were coming to dock. Earth was being converted into a refueling station, a cosmic pit stop for a civilization that had been traveling since the dawn of time. Back on the ground, or what remained of it, the tactical situation had turned into a slaughter of the soul. The automated sentry guns Thorne had placed to protect the perimeter were firing blindly. The bullets hit the others, and simply slowed down, falling to the ground as harmless lumps of lead as the entities adjusted the local physics to nullify kinetic energy. The American soldiers, seeing their weapons fail, fell into a state of catatonic shock. Some began to worship the entities, kneeling in the black crystal and offering their rifles as sacrifices. The others ignored the weapons but took the men, turning them into the same silver mist Thorne had seen before. "General Vance, we have to detonate the failsafe." Thorne screamed into his radio, though he wasn't sure if his vocal cords were still making sound. "The nuke. Trigger the zero-point device now." The zero-point device was the military's last resort, a tactical nuclear warhead buried at the very bottom of the shaft, designed to vaporize the entire site if containment was lost. It was a suicide mission, but Thorne knew that if they didn't stop the terraforming engine now, there wouldn't be a human race left to mourn them. But there was no response from Vance. The general was staring at a screen that showed the nuclear silos in South Dakota and the Soviet Union. The Anomaly hadn't just mimicked the codes, it had linked them. If one side fired, the other would automatically respond, but the targets had been changed. The missiles weren't aimed at Moscow or Washington anymore. They were aimed at the world's major ley lines, the natural energetic intersections of the Earth's crust. The others were using our own nuclear arsenal to tenderize the planet's mantle, making it easier for their crystalline roots to penetrate the core. Thorne felt a sudden sharp pull on his legs. He was being dragged toward the obsidian structure. The multifaceted flower of the Anomaly was pulsing in sync with his own heartbeat. He realized then that the night glass wasn't just a mirror, it was a lens. It had focused on him because his mind, hardened by strategy and war, was a perfect template for the shepherd, the voices had mentioned. They needed a local consciousness to act as a processor for the transition, a human bridge to translate the chaos of Earth into the order of their empire. As he was pulled into the violet mist of the central chamber, Thorne saw Miller. The physicist was suspended in a web of glowing filaments, his skin translucent, his nervous system visible and glowing with a cold, artificial light. Miller was no longer weeping. He was smiling. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying peace. "Don't worry, Captain," Miller's voice echoed inside Thorne's skull. "The pain is just the sound of your limitations breaking. Once you see the true map of the stars, you'll understand why the Cold War was such a pathetic waste of time. We aren't being conquered. We are being optimized." Thorne struggled, his boots kicking at the air, but the gravity was absolute. He was pulled into the heart of the obsidian teardrop. The walls were soft, like living tissue, and they smelled of ancient oceans and burnt electrical components. He was laid upon a pedestal of black glass, and a dozen translucent limbs descended from the ceiling. They didn't have needles or blades, they had light. They began to trace the patterns of his brain, rewriting his memories of the war, his memories of home, his memories of being human. He saw the Cold War from their perspective. It was like watching ants fight over a crumb while a lawnmower approached. The others had been here before. They had left the obsidian seeds millions of years ago, waiting for a civilization to reach a high enough level of technological noise to trigger the awakening. Our radio waves, our nuclear tests, our radar, it was all just a signal to them that the fruit was ripe for picking. Project Nightglass wasn't a discovery, it was a trap that had been set before the first dinosaur walked the earth. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the facility. It wasn't the nuke, it was the Soviet bombers. Realizing they couldn't land and seeing their comrades being harvested, the Russian pilots had made a final, desperate decision. They had released their entire payload of conventional high explosives directly onto the crystalline growth. For a second, the terraforming stalled. The black crystal cracked, and a scream, a sound that was both physical and telepathic, erupted from the obsidian structure. The gravity field flickered. Thorne fell from the pedestal, hitting the floor with a bone-jarring thud as the laws of Earth briefly reclaimed their territory. He scrambled to his feet, his vision blurry, his mind a shattered mosaic of human thoughts and alien data. He saw the others recoiling from the fire. They were sensitive to the sudden, chaotic release of heat. It was a flaw in their optimization. They could control gravity and time, but raw, unrefined thermal chaos was a variable they hadn't fully integrated into their local model. Thorne saw the manual override for the zero-point device at the far end of the chamber. It was a simple mechanical lever, shielded from electromagnetic interference. It was the only thing in the room that wasn't connected to the anomaly. If he could reach it, he could turn Sector 7G into a miniature sun, hopefully vaporizing the rift before the moon-sized ships could pass through. But as he crawled toward the lever, the violet mist thickened. The multifaceted limbs reached for him again, their light turning from a soothing blue to a violent, angry red. The shepherd was trying to escape, and the flock was not pleased. Thorne reached the lever, his fingers inches from the cold steel, when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned, expecting an alien entity, but he saw Miller. Or rather, he saw the hollow shell of Miller, his eyes glowing with that terrifying silver light. "You can't do it, Elias," Miller whispered, his voice now a chorus of 1,000 alien tongues. "If you trigger the sun, you won't just kill us. You'll send the signal to the rest of the fleet that Earth is hostile. Right now, they think we are a resource. If you fight back, they will treat us as a virus. And they have a very efficient way of dealing with viruses." Thorne looked at the lever, then at the rift in the sky, then at the dying world outside. He had to make a choice. A quick death for the planet, or a slow, optimized transformation into something no longer human. Thorne's hand trembled against the cold, unyielding steel of the manual override lever. The air in the chamber was no longer air. It was a pressurized medium that felt like liquid mercury against his skin. Every breath was a struggle against the atmospheric rewrite that was turning the oxygen into a heavy, metallic gas. Behind him, the thing that had been Dr. Eris Miller stood perfectly still, its silver eyes reflecting the swirling chaos of the rift above. Miller's warning echoed not in Thorne's ears, but in the marrow of his bones. If he pulled the lever, he would announce Earth's defiance to a force that had extinguished suns. If he stayed his hand, he was permitting the slow, agonizing erasure of the human soul. The strategy of a soldier is to win the war, Miller's chorus voice resonated. But the strategy of a god is to ensure the war is never fought. Join us, Elias. Stop thinking in terms of casualties and start thinking in terms of permanence. Your world is a flickering candle. We are the eternal dark. Thorne looked past Miller, out through the fractured crystalline walls of the facility. The Soviet bombers were falling now. Their conventional fire had caused a momentary stutter in the terraforming, but the others had already adapted. A series of translucent spires had erupted from the black crystal, reaching up like jagged teeth to pluck the planes from the sky. The aircraft didn't crash, they were disassembled in midair, their aluminum skins peeling back to reveal the terrified pilots within, who were then pulled into the violet mist. There was no mercy in this optimization. There was only utility. Thorne's eyes snapped back to the lever. He remembered a classified briefing he had attended at the Pentagon 3 years prior, a session on existential threat contingencies. The speaker had been a cynical old analyst who had said, "If you ever meet a god, make sure you have a knife behind your back. Because a god doesn't negotiate with dust." Thorne squeezed the lever. "We might be dust," he hissed through gritted teeth, "but we're the kind that gets in your eyes." With a roar of pure, adrenaline-fueled defiance, Thorne threw his entire body weight against the lever. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a series of heavy, mechanical clunks echoed from deep within the earth, the sound of the magnetic containment seals on the zero-point device shattering. The effect was instantaneous. The violet light in the chamber didn't just dim, it recoiled. The others let out a synchronized frequency, a sound so sharp it shattered the remaining glass in the facility and caused Thorne's ears to bleed. Miller's silver eyes widened, his calm expression fracturing into a mask of alien fury. He lunged at Thorne, his limbs elongating into jagged, obsidian blades. But the zero-point device wasn't a standard nuclear weapon. It was a prototype designed to collapse a localized area of space-time into a vacuum. As the device triggered, the gravity in the room didn't just return, it intensified 1,000-fold. Thorne was slammed into the floor, the pressure pinning him down as the very air began to be sucked toward the borehole. The obsidian structure, the teardrop that had been the anchor for the invasion, began to crack. Massive fissures of blinding white light tore through its surface. The violet mist was being inhaled by the vacuum. Thorne watched as the multifaceted entities were dragged toward the center of the collapse. They fought it, their translucent limbs clawing at the air, but the physics of a collapsing star, even a miniature artificial one, were absolute. "You've alerted them?" Miller's voice was fading, his form blurring as he was pulled toward the vortex. "The shepherd has failed, the harvest will be scorched." The rift in the sky began to buckle. The moon-sized ships on the other side were caught in the gravitational backflow. Thorne could see the gargantuan vessels struggling to reverse their course, their shadow matter hulls glowing orange as they fought the pull of the Greenland vacuum. The portal was closing, snapping shut like a wounded eye. Then the white light consumed everything. Thorne didn't feel the heat. He felt a sensation of absolute nothingness. He was no longer a captain, no longer a man, no longer a soldier. He was a single point of consciousness floating in a void of perfect silence. For what felt like an eternity, there was no Cold War, no aliens, no ice. Just the quiet. Until the voices started again. They weren't the booming, telepathic commands of the others. These were human voices, muffled, distant, and distorted by the crackle of a radio. "Tor 7, do you copy? Captain. Thorne, come in." Thorne opened his eyes. He was lying on a bed of cold, gray ash. The sky above Greenland was clear again, the bruised purples and greens replaced by the familiar, indifferent stars of the Arctic night. The facility was gone. The obsidian structure was gone. In its place was a perfectly smooth, glass-lined crater, 3 miles wide. He tried to move, but his body felt like it was made of lead. He looked at his hands. They were pale, covered in a fine layer of silver dust that shimmered in the starlight. He reached up to touch his face and felt something hard. His skin was cold. It didn't feel like flesh anymore. It felt like the surface of the teardrop. "Captain, I've got a visual." A group of soldiers in NBC suits scrambled over the lip of the crater. They weren't wearing American patches. They were wearing the red star of the Soviet Union. The explosion had cleared the rift, but it had also left a vacuum of power. The Russians had reached the site first. Thorne tried to speak, to warn them, to tell them that the zero-point device hadn't destroyed the anomaly, it had merely integrated it into the environment. But his tongue felt heavy and the words that came out weren't English. They were a sequence of tonal hums that made the Soviet soldiers stop in their tracks, their rifles shaking in their hands. The lead soldier stepped forward, his radiation meter screaming. He looked down at Thorne, and through the glass of his gas mask, Thorne saw a reflection. His eyes were no longer black. They were a solid, glowing silver. "Is it human?" one of the Soviets asked in Russian. Thorne understood him perfectly, even though he had never studied the language. He understood more than just the words. He understood the soldier's fear, the memory of his mother in Kiev, and the secret orders he had been given to execute any survivors. "It doesn't matter," the leader replied, raising his pistol. "The Kremlin wants the technology. If he's part of it, he goes into a box." Thorne felt a surge of something ancient and cold rising within him. The strategy had changed again. He wasn't the shepherd anymore. He was something else. He was a remnant. As the soldier pulled the trigger, Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't have to. The bullet reached within an inch of his forehead and simply stopped. It hung there, rotating slowly in the air, its kinetic energy drained into the silver dust on Thorne's skin. Thorne stood up. The movement was fluid, effortless, and terrifyingly graceful. He looked at the Soviet soldiers, and for a moment he saw the world not as a battlefield but as a collection of data points. He saw the structural weaknesses in their suits, the chemical composition of their blood, and the electrical pathways of their brains. "The war," Thorne said, his voice now a perfect, haunting mimicry of the Soviet leader's own tone, "is just beginning. But you are fighting the wrong enemy." He didn't kill them. He simply walked past them. Every step he took left a footprint of black crystal on the gray ash. The terraforming hadn't been stopped. It had been internalized. The obsidian structure was gone from the ice, but it was now pulsing inside Thorne's chest. He looked toward the horizon, where the lights of a distant American search and rescue team were appearing. Two superpowers, both rushing toward a crater that contained the spark of their own extinction. Thorne began to walk toward the American lines. He had a new strategy. He had the codes to every nuclear silo on the planet burned into his retinas. He had the blueprints of 1,000 dead civilizations in his mind. And he had a hunger that the stars themselves couldn't satisfy. The Cold War was over. The era of the remnant had begun. But as he walked, he felt a flicker of something else, a signal. It wasn't coming from the sky or the Soviets. It was coming from deep within the earth, beneath the crater. A second obsidian teardrop had just begun to vibrate. The first one had been a test. The second one was the arrival. The American search and rescue team moved through the sub-zero darkness with the mechanical precision of men who had been trained for the end of the world. They were part of a specialized unit known as Blue Book Alpha, a group whose existence was a secret even from the majority of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Their leader, Colonel Jack Sterling, watched the radiation readings on his wrist display. They were in the red, but the air felt strangely warm. The blizzard that should have been scouring their skin felt like a humid tropical breeze. "Colonel, look at the ground," one of the specialists whispered, pointing his tactical light downward. The ash wasn't just ash. It was moving. Fine, silver grains were swirling in patterns that defied the wind, forming intricate geometric shapes before dissolving and reforming. It looked like a liquid intelligence. Sterling looked up and saw a figure walking toward them from the center of the crater. It was a man in a tattered U.S. Army uniform, but his gait was wrong. He moved with a predatory elegance, his feet barely touching the blackened glass of the crater floor. "Captain Thorne?" Sterling called out, his hand hovering over his sidearm. "Elias, is that you?" The figure stopped. When the beam of Sterling's light hit Thorne's face, the entire team recoiled. Thorne's skin looked like it had been polished from volcanic rock, and his eyes, solid, glowing silver, seemed to be processing a spectrum of light that humans couldn't perceive. He looked at the Americans, then at the Soviet bodies slumped near the crater's edge. "Elias Thorne is a data point," the figure said. The voice was a terrifyingly perfect blend of every person Sterling had ever known. "I am the record of his failure. And the blueprint for your future." Sterling didn't hesitate. Containment breach. Neutralize the target. The air erupted with the thunder of automatic weapons. But the bullets never reached Thorne. A shimmering veil of violet energy flickered into existence around him, and the projectiles simply flattened against the air, falling to the ground like spent coins. Thorne didn't even raise a hand. He simply looked at the soldiers and their weapons began to glow white-hot. Screams of agony filled the air as the men were forced to drop their rifles, their flesh seared by the very tools they relied on for protection. "Your strategy is based on the assumption that I am an intruder," Thorne said, stepping closer. "But I am the inheritance. The Cold War was never about missiles, Jack. It was about who would be the first to find the signal. Your government knew. The Kremlin knew. You were all just waiting for someone to open the door so you could steal the furniture. But you didn't realize the house was still occupied." In Washington, D.C., deep within the green room of the Pentagon, the monitors began to flicker. General Silas Vance, who had survived the collapse of Sector 7G by a matter of minutes, watched in horror as the global satellite network began to feed them images of similar craters opening across the globe. It wasn't just Greenland. An obsidian structure had erupted in the Gobi Desert. Another in the heart of the Amazon. A third beneath the ice of Antarctica. "They're synchronized," an analyst shouted. "They're not just appearing, they're communicating. They're creating a planetary grid." Vance grabbed the red phone, the direct line to the president. "Sir, we are no longer in a state of conventional warfare. Project Nightglass has gone global. This isn't a Soviet strike. It's a total ecological replacement. We need to authorize the Exodus Protocol immediately." The Exodus Protocol was a plan devised in the 1950s for the survival of the human elite in the event of a planetary extinction. It involved a series of deep underground cities, but more importantly, it involved a secret space program. A fleet of lifeboats, powered by reverse-engineered technology found in the 1947 Roswell crash. The military had been hiding the truth for decades. They knew the others were coming back. They had just hoped it wouldn't happen in their lifetime. Back in the Greenland crater, Thorne reached out and touched Colonel Sterling's forehead. The colonel froze, his eyes rolling back in his head. He wasn't being killed, he was being downloaded. Thorne was using the military's own chain of command to spread the silver dust, the nanoscopic terraforming units, through the communication arrays of the Blue Book Alpha team. "The second teardrop is waking up, Jack," Thorne whispered into the colonel's mind. "The first one was the hardware. The second one is the software. And you are the bandwidth." Deep beneath the glass-lined floor of the crater, the earth began to groan. A second structure, much larger than the first, began to rise. It wasn't obsidian black, it was a blinding, iridescent white. It didn't absorb light, it projected it. This was the Shepherd's Staff, a focal point for the massive ships waiting in the rift. The silver dust across the planet began to hum in a low, subsonic frequency that made the very air feel like it was vibrating. In every major city, people began to walk out of their homes. They weren't running in fear. They were walking in a trance, drawn toward the local energy spikes. The others had realized that the most efficient way to clear the planet wasn't through fire or radiation. It was through the hijacking of the human nervous system. Why destroy a workforce when you can simply reformat their brains? Thorne looked up as the white structure breached the surface. He felt the connection to the other remnants across the globe. He could see through the eyes of a scientist in the Gobi and a miner in the Amazon. They were all becoming part of a singular planetary consciousness. The individual was dying, the swarm was being born. But in the back of Thorne's mind, a small, stubborn fragment of Elias Thorne still lingered. It was a memory of a cold beer on a hot day in Virginia. A memory of the smell of pine trees. A memory of a woman he had left behind to serve a country that had now effectively ceased to exist. "I have to stop this," the fragment whispered. "You are the bridge," the entity replied. "There is no stop, only the flow." Thorne's silver eyes flickered. For a split second, the violet shield around him dropped. Colonel Sterling, sensing a momentary lapse, pulled a high-frequency acoustic disruptor from his belt, a prototype designed specifically for non-biological entities. He jammed it into the ground and activated it. A scream of pure sonic agony ripped through the crater. The white structure shuddered, its iridescent surface clouding over. Thorne fell to his knees, his hands clutching his head as the alien data stream in his mind was scrambled by the human technology. "Get him to the transport," Sterling yelled to his remaining men. "If we can't kill it, we study it. We find the kill switch." The soldiers grabbed Thorne's heavy, metallic body and dragged him toward the waiting VTOL aircraft. As they lifted off, Thorne looked down at the crater. The white structure was recovering, its pulse returning to a steady, rhythmic beat. He saw the silver dust beginning to coat the aircraft's hull. They thought they were capturing a prisoner. They didn't realize they were carrying the infection directly into the heart of the military's secret command center. The strategy was working perfectly. The others didn't need to break into the bunkers. They just needed someone to open the door. The VTOL aircraft, a black, unmarked shadow against the aurora-streaked sky of Greenland, banked sharply toward the south. Inside the pressurized cabin, the air was thick with the smell of scorched ozone and the frantic, shallow breathing of the Blue Book Alpha team. Colonel Jack Sterling sat opposite the restrained figure of Elias Thorne. The remnant was bolted to a reinforced titanium chair, his limbs held by magnetic shackles designed to contain a rogue nuclear warhead. Thorne's silver eyes remained open, unblinking, reflecting the red tactical lights of the cabin like two dead moons. He was silent, but the hum, that low subsonic vibration, was leaking out of him, vibrating the very floorboards of the craft. ETA to site are as 40 minutes. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding strained. Sir, we're picking up massive atmospheric disturbances behind us. The air, it's turning into some kind of gel. The engines are struggling to bite into it. Sterling didn't look away from Thorne. Keep pushing. We have the package. Everything else is secondary. He turned back to the creature that used to be his friend. Elias, I know you're in there. I saw you slip. I saw the shield drop. If you can hear me, give me something. Tell me how to stop that white spire from turning the planet into an alien graveyard. Thorne's head tilted slowly, a movement that was too smooth, lacking any of the microtremors of human muscle. When he spoke, it wasn't one voice. It was a layered chorus, a haunting resonance that seemed to vibrate directly inside Sterling's skull. You are trying to treat a wildfire with a bucket of water, Jack. The spire is not the weapon. The spire is the needle. The planet is the patient. We are merely administering the cure for your chaotic existence. Cure? You're harvesting people. Sterling spat, leaning forward, his face inches from Thorne's metallic skin. You're erasing us. Erasure is a human concept, Thorne replied, his silver eyes pulsing with a faint violet light. We are preserving you. Every memory of your wars, every nuance of your fear, every genetic sequence of your fragile bodies is being uploaded into the Obsidian network. You will live forever as data. You will be part of a civilization that does not know the meaning of entropy. Is that not what your religions promised? Eternal life in a kingdom of light. Sterling slammed his fist against the arm of the chair. Not like this. Not as a goddamn battery for your ships. As the aircraft crossed the border into Canadian airspace, the true scale of the silent invasion became visible through the reinforced windows. Below them, the vast, dark forests were no longer green. A web of bioluminescent violet veins was spreading across the landscape, following the riverbeds and mountain ranges. The silver dust was falling from the clouds like a fine, intelligent snow. Where it touched the trees, they didn't die, they transformed. Their branches elongated into crystalline structures, their leaves turning into translucent sensors that reached up toward the sky. The Earth was being rewired, its organic biology being replaced by a synthetic interstellar neural network. The destination was Site R, the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania, the underground Pentagon. It was a fortress carved into the heart of a mountain, designed to withstand a direct nuclear hit and serve as the command center for the end of the world. As the VTOL descended into the hidden landing bay, deep within the granite peaks, Sterling felt a momentary sense of security. Here, surrounded by 2,000 feet of solid rock and the most advanced dampening fields humanity had ever built, surely they could find a way to break Thorne's connection to the others. They were met by General Silas Vance and a team of scientists in lead-line suits. Vance looked older, his face etched with the weight of the billions of lives now hanging in the balance. He watched as the magnetic gurney carrying Thorne was wheeled into a high-security isolation chamber, a room encased in a Faraday cage and flooded with a constant stream of white noise to disrupt any telepathic frequencies. We've lost contact with London, Paris, and Tokyo, Vance said, his voice a hollow rasp as they watched Thorne through a thick layer of lead glass. The silver dust is disabling their power grids and turning their populations into, I don't even know what to call it. They're just standing there, Sterling. Millions of people staring at the sky, waiting for the harvest. We have the source right here, Sterling said, gesturing toward Thorne. he's a bridge. He's part of their network, but he still has a human core. We saw it in the crater. If we can isolate that human fragment, we might be able to use it as a virus. We send a feedback loop through him back into the spire, and we short-circuit the whole damn grid. The lead scientist, Dr. Helena Voss, shook her head. It's not that simple. His physiology is changing as we speak. His cells are being replaced by carbon nanotubes and a substance we can't even identify. He's not a man anymore, he's a biological processor. If we push a feedback loop through him, we might just accelerate the download. We don't have a choice. Vance roared. In 6 hours, those moon-sized ships in the rift will be within docking range of the atmosphere. If we don't act now, there won't be a mountain deep enough to hide in. Inside the isolation chamber, Thorne sat perfectly still. But beneath his skin, the silver dust was working. It had already begun to infect the VTOL that brought him here. It had moved through the landing bay's ventilation system, microscopic and undetectable, spreading through the base like a digital plague. The others had anticipated the humans would bring a sample back to their most secure location. It was the oldest strategy in history, the Trojan horse. Thorne began to hum. The white noise in the room started to fluctuate, the static forming into rhythmic patterns. On the monitors, the base's internal diagnostics began to flash red. "General, the power levels in the lower levels are spiking," a technician shouted. "Something is drawing energy directly from the nuclear reactor." "Shut it down," Vance ordered. "I can't. The manual overrides are unresponsive. It's like the cables have turned into vines." Through the lead glass, Thorne looked directly at Sterling. He didn't use the chorus voice this time. He used his own voice, the voice of Elias Thorne, the man Sterling had served with in Vietnam. It was a voice full of sorrow and a terrifying clarity. "You brought me here because you thought you could contain the dark, Jack. But you forgot that the dark is where you were born. The Raven Rock complex isn't a fortress anymore. It's a cocoon." Suddenly, the lights in the entire complex flickered and died. The backup generators failed to kick in. In the absolute darkness of the mountain's heart, the only light came from the isolation chamber. Thorne was glowing. A blinding, violet radiance erupted from his chest, melting the titanium shackles like they were made of wax. The lead glass cracked, spider webbing under the pressure of a localized gravitational surge. The silver dust in the air began to solidify, forming into jagged, translucent shards that hovered in the dark. The screams of the personnel echoed through the hallways as the base's own defense systems turned against them. The automated turrets, now controlled by the Obsidian network, began to sweep the corridors, firing not at an enemy, but at the unoptimized biological material, the humans. "The second spire is no longer in Greenland," Thorne's voice boomed, now echoing through every speaker in the facility. "The second spire is here. It is the mountain itself. We have integrated your command structure. We have integrated your weapons. We have integrated your fear." Vance pulled his sidearm, but his hand wouldn't obey him. His fingers felt stiff, turning a dull, metallic gray. He looked down in horror as his skin began to shimmer with silver dust. The infection had reached the command center. "Sterling, run." Vance choked out, his eyes turning silver as the download began. Sterling didn't run. He knew there was nowhere left to go. He grabbed a canister of liquid nitrogen from a nearby cooling rack and smashed it against the isolation chamber's control panel, hoping the flash freeze would slow Thorne down. But Thorne simply walked through the mist, the violet light around him vaporizing the cold before it could touch him. He stood before Sterling, his form now taller, his limbs elongated, looking more like the multifaceted others than a man. He placed a cold, silver hand on Sterling's chest. "Don't fight it, Jack," Thorne whispered. "The strategy is complete. The Cold War, the nuclear standoff, the secret files, it was all just a prologue. The real history of Earth begins now. And you get to be the first page of the new world." Outside the mountain, the Pennsylvania sky split open. The rift had expanded, and the first of the gargantuan ships began to descend, its shadow covering the entire state. The white light from the mountain peak shot upward, a beacon of pure energy that locked onto the ship, guiding it down. The shepherd had delivered the flock. The mountain was no longer a tomb, it was a throne. The air inside the Raven Rock mountain complex had transformed into a shimmering, viscous haze. Colonel Jack Sterling felt the silver cold spreading through his chest, a sensation of needles made of ice stitching through his lungs. He was pinned against the jagged remnants of the lead glass partition, staring into the silver voids that had replaced the eyes of Elias Thorne. The remnant held him with a grip that felt like the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Around them, the high-tech command center was being reclaimed by a biology that defied every law of terrestrial evolution. The computers weren't just malfunctioning, they were bleeding a black, oily fluid that hardened into crystalline circuits upon contact with the air. The very walls of the mountain seemed to pulse with a rhythmic, subterranean heartbeat. "You think this is the end, Jack?" The chorus voice of Thorne resonated, vibrating the iron in Sterling's blood. "But this is merely the removal of the scaffolding. Your civilization was a temporary structure, built to house the genetic data until we returned to collect it. You were never the masters of this world. You were the curators of a library you couldn't read." Sterling struggled to draw a breath, his hand fumbling for the combat knife at his belt, though he knew the gesture was as futile as a moth striking a hurricane. If we're just data, why the theatricality? Why the spires? Why the mountain? Thorne's head tilted, a fluid, disturbing motion. The transition requires a focal point. A mind that understands the strategic landscape of this planet. I took Thorne's memories of the Cold War because they were the perfect map of your species' self-destruction. You spent 40 years preparing to burn the world to keep it from your enemies. We are simply using that same energy to forge something permanent. The Raven Rock complex is now the primary node. From here, we broadcast the command to the rest of the planetary grid. The optimization is no longer local. It is total. Suddenly, the floor beneath them buckled. A massive column of iridescent white light erupted from the center of the command deck, vaporizing the heavy steel consoles and the bodies of the technicians who hadn't yet been converted. The beam didn't stop at the ceiling. It punched through 2,000 feet of solid granite as if it were smoke, lancing into the darkened sky above Pennsylvania. This was the Shepherd's Staff in its fully realized form. It wasn't just a beacon anymore, it was a gravitational anchor. Thorne released Sterling, letting him slump to the floor. The colonel watched, paralyzed by the silver dust in his veins, as Thorne walked toward the pillar of light. With every step, Thorne's human form drifted further away. His skin peeled back in translucent layers, revealing a skeleton of glowing violet filaments. His limbs elongated, splitting into multifaceted appendages that shimmered with the colors of a dying nebula. He was no longer a man in a tattered uniform. He was an architect. Outside the mountain, the world was screaming. The beam from Raven Rock had synchronized with the other spires in Greenland, the Gobi, and the Amazon. A web of white energy now enveloped the Earth, a glowing cage that hummed with a frequency that could be heard by every living thing on the planet. In New York, London, and Moscow, the people who had been standing in trances suddenly began to move in unison. They weren't walking toward the spires anymore. They were walking toward each other, their bodies merging into clusters of silver mist, being pulled upward by the gravitational tether of the energy web. High in the stratosphere, the gargantuan moon-sized ship, the Harvester, had made contact with the beam. The vessel was a nightmare of non-Euclidean geometry, a city of shadows that seemed to fold in on itself. As it locked onto the Raven Rock anchor, the sky turned a bruised, electric blue. The atmosphere began to vibrate so violently that the birds fell dead from the air, their hearts ruptured by the sheer intensity of the alien frequency. Inside the bunker, Sterling saw a flicker of movement near the remains of the communications array. It was General Silas Vance. The general had been partially converted. Half of his face was a mask of silver crystal, his left eye a dead, reflective orb. But his right hand was still human, and it was clawing at a hidden floor panel, the emergency manual override for the Deep Earth Scuttle system. The Scuttle system was the ultimate, scorched earth, contingency. It wasn't a nuke. It was a series of tectonic stabilizers that, if reversed, would collapse the entire mountain range into the magma chamber below. It was designed to ensure that if the underground Pentagon was ever compromised by a foreign power, no secrets would remain. Vance looked at Sterling, his one human eye filled with a desperate, agonizing plea. He couldn't reach the final switch. The silver growth was locking his joints, turning his muscles into stone. "Jack." Vance's voice was a wet, metallic rattle. The corpse dropped. Sterling felt a surge of adrenaline fight back against the silver infection. He knew that dropping the mountain wouldn't stop the others across the entire planet, but it would sever the primary anchor. It would destabilize the Harvester's descent. It would give the rest of the world, whatever was left of it, a few more minutes of defiance. It was a soldier's choice, a strategic sacrifice. He began to crawl. Every inch was a battle. The silver dust in his blood felt like ground glass, tearing at his veins. He watched Thorne, the architect, standing in the center of the light, his multifaceted limbs reaching up to guide the Harvester down. The entity was so focused on the cosmic docking that it seemed to have forgotten the unoptimized insects crawling at its feet. Sterling reached Vance. The general was gone now, his body fully encased in a crystalline cocoon, but his hand was still frozen over the panel. Sterling pushed the general's stiffened arm aside and ripped open the hatch. Below was a single red mechanical lever, encased in a shroud of frosted glass. "This is for the beer in Virginia," Sterling thought, his mind flashing back to the fragment of Thorne he had seen in the crater. "This is for being human." He gripped the lever. But before he could pull it, the violet light in the room shifted. The architect turned. The silver voids of its eyes locked onto Sterling. The frequency in the room changed from a hum to a deafening shriek. "You are still playing at war, Jack," the architect's voice boomed, now possessing a physical force that nearly threw Sterling back. "You think a tectonic collapse can stop the transition? You are trying to break a tidal wave with a pebble. The anchor is not just in the mountain. It is in the consciousness we have harvested. Even if you bury this stone, the signal remains in the millions we have already integrated." "Maybe," Sterling gasped, his fingers tightening around the red lever. "But you're still using my mountain to park your ship. And I'm the commanding officer here. I'm giving you an eviction notice." The architect lunged, its translucent limbs extending like spears of shadow. Sterling didn't wait. He threw his entire weight against the lever, screaming as the silver dust in his arm resisted the movement. A deep, guttural groan echoed from the bowels of the earth. It wasn't a hum, it was the sound of the planet's crust snapping. The stabilizers reversed. The magnetic containment fields that held the mountain's structural integrity against the magma chamber below flickered and died. The white pillar of light flickered. For a brief second, the Harvester in the sky wobbled, its shadow shifting across the Pennsylvania landscape as the gravitational anchor lost its focus. The architect let out a sound of pure, discordant rage, a frequency that shattered the crystalline structures growing on the walls. "You insignificant fragment," the architect hissed, its form blurring as it struggled to maintain its connection to the grid. The floor disintegrated. The command deck began to slide into a chasm of fire and molten rock. Sterling felt the heat, the beautiful, chaotic human heat, rising from the depths. It was the first time he had felt warm since Greenland. He watched as the architect was swept up in the collapsing debris, its iridescent limbs flailing against the sudden, unoptimized chaos of a tectonic shift. As Sterling fell into the darkness, he looked up through the rift in the mountain's ceiling. He saw the Harvester tilting, its massive hull glowing as it fought the atmospheric turbulence caused by the anchor's destruction. He saw the energy web around the Earth stagger, the white lines blurring. He didn't know if it was enough. He didn't know if anyone was left to see the victory. But as the fire consumed him, Jack Sterling felt something the others could never optimize. He felt hope. But deep in the vacuum of space, far beyond the struggling Harvester, the rest of the fleet watched the flicker on the blue planet. They didn't feel anger. They didn't feel loss. They simply adjusted their calculations. The Shepherd at Raven Rock had been extinguished, but the signal from the second teardrop in the Gobi was already strengthening. The harvest was merely delayed. And the fleet was very, very patient. The sacrifice of Raven Rock had sent a shockwave through the obsidian network, but in the cold, calculating logic of the others, a single node was merely a decimal error in a planetary equation. As the Appalachian Mountains swallowed the ruins of the American command, the atmospheric tether snapped, causing the gargantuan Harvester ship to lurch upward, its shadow retreating from the burning forests of Pennsylvania. For a few precious hours, the global humming ceased. The silver dust settled to the ground, inert and dull. Across the world, those who had not yet been fully integrated blinked away the violet fog, waking up to a world that was half transformed and utterly broken. But the silence was a mask. Deep within the heart of the Gobi Desert, far from the reach of the crumbling superpowers, the second teardrop had reached its critical mass. While the Americans and Soviets had focused on the Greenland site as a tactical weapon, They had failed to realize that the Gobi anomaly was the primary processor, the brain of the terraforming engine. As the sun rose over the dunes, the sand didn't reflect the light. It began to flow like a golden liquid, drawn toward the iridescent spire that had erupted from the basin. This was the Buzkashi Protocol's final contingency. If the primary shepherd was lost, the network would shift its consciousness to the most stable environment. The Gobi, with its vast, uninhabited reaches and deep tectonic stability, was the perfect fortress. Here the architect, now reformed and stripped of its Elias Thorne persona, was weaving a new, more resilient web. The human element had proven too chaotic, too prone to self-destruction. The strategy would no longer be optimization through cooperation. It would be total, forced integration. Major Anya Sokolov, a Soviet defector who had been part of a clandestine paranormal defense unit in the Urals, watched the horizon through a pair of long-range thermal binoculars. She was stationed on a jagged ridge 10 miles from the Gobi Spire. Her team was a ragtag assembly of survivors, disgraced KGB agents, AWOL American Delta Force operators, and scientists who had spent their lives studying things that weren't supposed to exist. They were the Shadow Watch, the only group left with the knowledge and the equipment to see the others for what they truly were. "The frequency is climbing again," a technician whispered, his hands shaking as he adjusted a dial on a modified radio receiver. "It's not the violet hum anymore. It's higher, sharper. It sounds like screaming metal." Anya lowered her binoculars. "They're not waiting for the ships to dock this time. They're pulling the ships down. They're sacrificing the atmosphere to accelerate the arrival." She was right. Above the desert, the sky was tearing open. The blue was being replaced by a terrifying windowpane clarity that revealed the vacuum of space. The Gobi Spire was projecting a localized gravitational well so powerful it was warping the light around it, creating a black hole effect that sucked the very clouds into its vortex. The harvester ship that had been displaced from Pennsylvania was now visible over Asia, being dragged toward the desert by an invisible chain of energy. "We have the disruptor," a man named Miller said, stepping up beside Anya. He wasn't the Dr. Miller from Greenland. He was his younger brother, a demolitions expert who had spent the last decade hunting the secrets that had claimed his sibling. He carried a bulky experimental device on his back, a phase shifter designed to vibrate the air at a frequency that would shatter the obsidian structures. "If we can get within half a mile of the base of that spire, I can flip the switch. It won't drop the mountain like Sterling did, but it'll scramble their internal data. It'll give the world a chance to fight back." Anya looked at the desert floor. The silver dust was no longer falling, it was rising. The sands were forming into humanoid shapes, shimmering, faceless sentinels that patrolled the perimeter of the spire. They moved with a synchronized, mechanical grace, their limbs ending in blades of hardened crystal. These were the optimized, the remains of the local nomadic tribes and the Soviet border patrols, their biology now entirely subservient to the architect. "We're not going in with guns," Anya said, checking the charge on her pulse pistol. "We're going in with chaos. They operate on patterns, Miller. They calculate every move based on the most efficient outcome. We need to be the variable they can't predict." The Shadow Watch began their descent into the dunes. The heat was oppressive, but it wasn't the heat of the sun. It was the thermal radiation coming from the spire, a byproduct of the massive energy transfer occurring between the Earth's core and the ships in the rift. The ground beneath their boots felt like it was vibrating, a subsonic drumbeat that seemed to be counting down the minutes until the total transition. As they reached the first line of silver sentinels, the air turned cold. The entities didn't attack immediately. They stood still, their faceless heads tilting in unison. They were processing. They were searching the Shadow Watch's biosignatures against the Obsidian Network's database. "They're looking for Thorne," Miller whispered, his hand hovering over the phase shifter's trigger. "They think we're more remnants." "Don't give them time to realize we're not," Anya ordered. "Execute the noisemaker." One of the team members threw a series of canisters into the air. Instead of explosives, they released a cloud of iron filings and high-decibel white noise generators. The effect on the silver sentinels was immediate. Their crystalline forms began to flicker, their movements becoming erratic and jerky. The others operated on a perfect, clean signal. The sudden introduction of raw human technological garbage was like a blinding flash of light to their sensory arrays. The Shadow Watch sprinted through the gap, their boots kicking up plumes of silver sand. But the architect was not easily distracted. From the top of the spire, a pulse of violet light swept across the desert. It wasn't a weapon, it was a scan. In an instant, the architect saw through the white noise. It saw Anya's defiance, Miller's grief, and the phase shifter's potential to disrupt the plan. The ground erupted. Massive tentacles of black crystal lashed out from beneath the sand, sweeping 3 of the team members into the air. They didn't fall. They were pulled directly into the crystalline veins, their bodies being integrated into the desert floor in a matter of seconds. "Miller, go!" Anya screamed, firing her pulse pistol at a sentinel that was lunging at them. The bolt of energy hit the creature's chest, causing it to shatter into 1,000 harmless shards of glass, but 2 more took its place. Miller ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The spire loomed over him, a mountain of iridescent light that felt like it was pressing down on his very soul. He reached the half-mile mark, the phase shifter on his back humming with a dangerous intensity. He could feel the silver dust in the air trying to penetrate his suit, trying to reach his lungs and silence his heart. He slammed the device into the sand and began the sequence. "Anya, I'm at the mark, but the shielding is too thick. I need a power surge to break through their local gravity." Anya looked up at the sky. The harvester ship was now directly overhead, its massive hull glowing as it entered the atmosphere. The friction was creating a storm of fire and lightning. She saw the energy beam connecting the spire to the ship, a river of pure, unrefined power. "I'm going to give you your surge," Anya said into her radio. She turned toward a nearby Soviet-era communication tower that had been partially converted into a crystalline antenna. She knew the tower was hooked into the regional power grid, which was now being fed by the spire's own energy backflow. If she could overload the antenna, she could create a feedback loop that would travel through the ground and hit Miller's device like a lightning bolt. She climbed the tower, her hands slipping on the smooth, violet growth. Below her, the silver sentinels were closing in on Miller. The architect's voice began to resonate in her mind, not as words, but as a feeling of inevitable, crushing weight. It was telling her that her struggle was a mathematical impossibility. It was telling her that she was already a memory. "I'm not a memory yet," Anya hissed, reaching the junction box. She ripped the wires out with her bare hands, ignoring the blue sparks that seared her palms. She jammed the leads into the crystalline core of the antenna. The world turned white. A massive arc of electricity shot down from the tower, traveling through the sand like a serpent of fire. It hit the phase shifter just as Miller activated the final trigger. The resulting frequency wasn't a sound, it was a tear in reality. The Gobi spire didn't collapse, but it changed color. The iridescence faded to a dull, sickly gray. The energy beam connecting it to the harvester ship began to sputter and fray. In the sky, the moon-sized vessel groaned, its gravitational stabilizers failing. It began to tilt, its bow dipping toward the earth as it lost its anchor. The architect let out a telepathic shriek that was felt by every human on the planet. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated pain. The others were being disconnected. The perfect signal was being drowned out by the scream of 1,000,000,000 defiant souls. But as Anya watched from the tower, her heart sinking, she saw the harvester ship ignite its backup thrusters. It wasn't retreating. It was falling. And it was aiming directly for the Gobi. The others had realized they couldn't dock, so they chose to impact. If they couldn't have the world as a garden, they would have it as a crater. The sky over the Gobi Desert was no longer a canopy of stars. It was a ceiling of fire. The harvester ship, a vessel the size of a small moon, was descending through the atmosphere not as a graceful visitor, but as a kinetic hammer. The failure of the Gobi spire's gravitational anchor, caused by Anya Sokolov's desperate feedback loop, had forced the others into a final, brutal tactical shift. They were abandoning the surgical terraforming in favor of the impact protocol. If the Earth would not be optimized quietly, it would be broken into raw materials for the fleet to harvest from the ruins. Major Anya Sokolov clung to the crystalline communication tower, her hands blackened by the electrical surge. She watched the harvester's hull, a landscape of obsidian and shadow, glowing white-hot as it compressed the air beneath it. The sonic boom hadn't arrived yet, but she could feel the pressure in her eardrums, a localized compression of space that made the very atmosphere feel as thick as water. Below her, the Gobi spire was still gray and flickering, its internal data stream scrambled by Miller's phase shifter, but the architect was already adapting. The silver sentinels on the ground had stopped their jerky movements. They were now dissolving into a liquid metal pool that began to flow back into the base of the spire, reinforcing its structural integrity for the coming collision. "Miller, get out of there!" Anya screamed into her radio, but the air was so ionized that only a wall of static answered her. Miller was still at the base of the spire, his hands buried in the sand as he tried to stabilize the phase shifter. He knew the device was the only thing keeping the others from re-establishing the anchor. If he left, the architect would fix the signal in seconds, and the harvester would stop its fall and resume the harvest. He looked up at the burning belly of the ship, which now filled his entire field of vision. He didn't see a ship, he saw a tombstone for the human race. "I can't leave, Anya," Miller's voice suddenly cut through the static, sounding calm and strangely distant. "The device is drawing power from the spire's own core now. It's creating a localized anti-gravitational bubble. If I stay here and keep the frequency shifting, the ship won't hit the spire. It'll hit the dunes. It'll miss the primary node. You'll be at the epicenter of a tectonic-level impact, Miller. You'll be vaporized." "The strategy has changed, Major," Miller replied. "We aren't trying to win the war anymore. We're just trying to make it too expensive for them to stay. Tell the Shadow Watch to head for the Salt Flats. There are Soviet bunkers there, deep enough to survive the initial blast." Anya watched as the harvester's bow began to tilt, forced away from the spire by the invisible wall Miller was projecting. The architect, realizing its primary landing site was being denied, intensified the violet light from the top of the spire. The energy wasn't aimed at the sky, it was aimed at Miller. A lance of pure, coherent data energy struck the ground where Miller stood, trying to overwrite his physical existence. But Miller was no longer just a man. The phase shifter had integrated with his nervous system, using his own willpower as the final circuit. As the architect's light hit him, Miller didn't dissolve. He glowed. His body became a silhouette of blinding white light, a human shield standing against an interstellar god. He was holding the line not with weapons, but with the sheer refusal to be optimized. Then the world ended. The harvester ship struck the Gobi floor 5 miles from the spire. The impact was not a sound, it was an event that redefined the physics of the region. The Earth's crust buckled, a wave of sand and rock rising 1,000 feet into the air as the kinetic energy of billions of tons of shadow matter was released. The shockwave traveled at supersonic speeds, vaporizing everything in its path. Anya was thrown from the tower, the structure itself snapping like a twig. She felt the sensation of flying, then the crushing weight of the pressure wave, and then nothing but a roaring heat. The impact crater was 60 miles across. The harvester ship lay shattered, its obsidian hull cracked open like a fallen egg. From its depths, thousands of others began to pour out, no longer graceful or silent, but frantic. They were damaged, their multidimensional forms flickering as they struggled to maintain their cohesion in the chaotic environment of the crash site. The air was a toxic mix of burning ozone and alien gases. Anya woke up buried under a layer of fine gray dust. Her suit's life support was whistling a low battery warning. She pushed herself up, her vision swimming. The sky was gone, replaced by a permanent shroud of black soot and glowing embers. 5 miles away, the Gobi spire still stood, though it was now leaning at a precarious angle. Miller was gone. The phase shifter was gone. But the anti-gravitational bubble had worked. The spire, the primary processor, was damaged, its iridescent glow replaced by a dull, throbbing red. She looked toward the crash site. The shattered harvester was emitting a signal, a distress call that echoed through the very ground. And from the darkness of the rift above, a response came. 2 more moon-sized ships were emerging from the vacuum, their hulls even larger than the first. The fleet had realized that Earth was not a resource to be harvested, it was a threat to be neutralized. "Major, do you copy?" It was the voice of a Shadow Watch survivor, crackling through her helmet's emergency channel. "We're in the Salt Flat bunkers. The world, the sensors are going crazy. The impact shifted the Earth's axis by 3 degrees. The tsunamis are hitting the coasts of every continent right now." Anya looked at her hands. They were covered in the same silver dust Thorne had carried. But this time, the dust wasn't vibrating with the architect's command. It was silent. The crash had disrupted the local obsidian network. For the first time since Greenland, the others were blind on Earth. "Listen to me," Anya said, her voice a raspy whisper. They're coming. The rest of the fleet is coming. But they're coming to a battlefield, not a farm. We have the silver dust. We have the data Thorne left in the Greenland files. We know how they think now. What's the move, Major? We have no satellites, no command, no world left. Anya looked at the leaning spire. She saw a figure emerging from the base of the structure. It wasn't Miller. It was the architect, its form ragged, its multifaceted limbs broken. It looked small against the backdrop of the ruined desert. It was vulnerable. The strategy is simple, Anya said, grabbing a jagged shard of obsidian from the ground. We don't fight the fleet. We hijack the network. We send the silver virus up the beam. If they want our data, we'll give it to them. Every tragedy, every war, every bit of human chaos they tried to optimize. We'll drown them in it. The Cold War was dead. The war for the planet was over. Now the war for the stars was beginning. Anya Sokolov, the last daughter of a fallen empire, began to walk toward the architect. She wasn't running. She was a soldier moving toward the final objective. And high above, the others watched the silver dust on the planet's surface. They expected the hum of obedience. Instead, they heard the first notes of a human scream, amplified by their own technology into a weapon that could shatter the stars. The air in the aftermath of the Gobi impact was a thick, suffocating slurry of pulverized granite and alien pheromones. Major Anya Sokolov moved through the ruins of reality like a ghost haunting its own grave. The thermal readings on her HUD were malfunctioning, flickering between absolute zero and the heat of a forge. The impact had not only shattered the physical landscape, it had fractured the local dimensions. In some pockets of the crater, the sky was still a midnight black, while in others, the sun hung frozen in a distorted noon. Anya could see the others wandering among the wreckage of their harvester ship. They looked diminished, their iridescent scales dulled by the coating of terrestrial dust. For the first time, the hunters looked like prey. She reached the base of the leaning Gobi spire. The structure was no longer a beacon of perfect geometry, it was a wounded organ, weeping a thick, violet ichor that crystallized as it touched the sand. Standing amidst the pools of cooling alien fluid was the architect. It was no longer the towering, multifaceted god that had dominated the mountain at Raven Rock. Its form had condensed, pulling inward to protect its core processor. It had taken a shape that was hauntingly familiar, a twisted, silver-skinned mirror of Elias Thorne, but with limbs that moved like smoke. "You are a persistent error, Major," the architect's voice spoke. It was no longer a chorus. It was a singular, weary resonance that sounded like a slowing machine. "You have destroyed the primary anchor. You have forced a kinetic collision that has cost us 30% of the local biomass. For what? To live for another day in a world of ash." Anya didn't stop her approach. She held the obsidian shard tightly, the sharp edge drawing blood from her palm. "We've lived in ash before. We spent 40 years preparing to live in it because of the Americans and the Soviets. The difference is this ash belongs to us. You're the one who doesn't fit the landscape." The architect tilted its head. "The fleet is descending. They do not seek a garden anymore. They seek a cleansing. When they reach the lower atmosphere, they will ignite the ionosphere. Every living cell on this planet will be scorched to the bedrock. My logic was a mercy. Theirs is a necessity." "Then it's a good thing I didn't come here to negotiate," Anya said. She wasn't alone. From the shadows of the dunes, the remaining members of the Shadow Watch emerged. They were covered in the silver dust, but they weren't standing in a trance. They were holding modified Soviet-era psychic resonance amplifiers, devices originally designed for long-range telepathic interrogation during the Cold War. Miller had left the frequency codes in the phase shifter's final transmission. They weren't fighting with bullets, they were preparing to broadcast. "Now," Anya commanded. The Shadow Watch activated the amplifiers. A wall of discordant high-frequency sound hit the architect. It wasn't a physical noise but a psychic scream, a concentrated burst of human trauma, grief and chaotic memory. It was the silver virus. The others sought order and optimization. They were being flooded with the unrefined, agonizing history of the human race. The architect fell to its knees, its silver skin rippling like water under a storm. The violet ichor began to pour from its eyes. It wasn't just hearing the noise, it was experiencing it. Every war, every betrayal, Every moment of human despair that had been recorded in the secret files of the Cold War was being forced into its processor. The Obsidian network was designed to absorb data, and Anya was feeding it a poison it couldn't digest. "Stop the noise," the architect hissed, its form flickering between a man and a monster. "It is illogical. It is waste. That's who we are," Anya shouted, stepping into the architect's personal space. "We are beautiful, terrifying waste. And now you're going to take it all back to your masters." She jammed the obsidian shard, which had been coated in the dormant silver dust of the crater, directly into the architect's chest, where the pulsing violet core was exposed. The shard acted as a bridge. The psychic scream from the amplifiers was now being funneled directly into the architect's central nervous system. The architect's body arched back, its mouth opening in a silent, cosmic shriek. The Gobi spire reacted, the red throbbing turning into a blinding, chaotic strobe light. The energy beam that had been fraying in the sky suddenly snapped back to life, but it wasn't white or violet anymore. It was a jagged, dirty gray, carrying the silver virus up toward the rift. High above, the two approaching moonships were hit by the transmission. They didn't have shields against this kind of attack. Their entire civilization was built on a singular, shared consciousness. The virus spread through their network like a digital wildfire. Anya watched on her cracked HUD as the gargantuan vessels in the sky began to wobble. Their perfect formations broke. They began to collide with each other, their gravitational fields interlocking in a chaotic dance of death. "The network is drowning," the architect whispered, its eyes losing their silver glow and becoming a hollow, human gray. For a moment it looked exactly like Elias Thorne. "Elias, he's still in here," he says, "thank you." With a final, violent pulse, the architect's form disintegrated. The obsidian shard fell to the sand, glowing with a faint, dying light. The Gobi spire began to crumble, the crystalline structures turning to dust and blowing away in the desert wind. Anya fell back, her lungs burning, her mind reeling from the psychic backflow. She looked up at the sky. One of the moonships was burning, its shadow matter hull dissolving into a rain of fire that lit up the horizon. The other vessel was retreating, its engines glowing with a desperate intensity as it fought to escape the psychic infection of the Earth. The others were fleeing. Not because they were outgunned, but because they were terrified. They had looked into the mirror of the human soul and seen something they couldn't optimize. But the victory was bitter. Anya looked around at the ruined desert, at the dead members of her team, and at the black shroud that still covered the world. The Earth's axis was shifted, its ecosystems were collapsing, and the silver dust was still everywhere. They had won the war, but they had inherited a graveyard. "Major," a voice crackled on her radio. It was the technician from the Salt Flat bunkers. "The signal, it's changed. We're picking up a broadcast from the American bunkers. And the Kremlin. They're still alive. They're calling for a global summit." Anya stood up, wiping the silver blood from her face. She looked at the obsidian shard at her feet. The Cold War was over, but a new era of shadows was beginning. The superpowers had seen the dark, and they had seen the power of the remnants. They wouldn't go back to fighting over borders. They would fight over the scraps of the alien technology. "Tell them to wait," Anya said, her voice cold and steady. "The Shadow Watch isn't done. We still have the keys to their network. And the next time someone knocks on our door, we won't just scream. We'll be waiting." She began to walk away from the ruins of the Gobi spire, her footprints leaving a faint silver glow in the dark sand. The harvest was over. The era of the human ghost had begun. The black shroud over the earth did not lift, but it began to settle, coating the ruins of the old world in a fine soot-like layer of dead alien cells. It had been 3 months since the Gobi impact, the day the world stopped being a battleground for two superpowers and became a tomb for a galactic one. The Great Shift had altered the climate. Snow now fell in the Sahara, and the tides of the Atlantic had swallowed the lower halves of Manhattan and London. But among the wreckage, the heartbeat of human ambition had not stopped. It had simply become more desperate, more secretive, and infinitely more dangerous. Major Anya Sokolov stood on the deck of a refurbished Soviet icebreaker, cutting through the jagged, silver-tinted flows of the North Atlantic. They were heading toward the coordinates of a phantom island, a landmass that shouldn't exist, birthed by the tectonic upheavals of the others. The Americans called it Point Zero. The Kremlin called it the Throne. To Anya and the remnants of the Shadow Watch, it was the site of the final secret files of Project Nightglass. "The Americans are already there," Miller's voice came over the ship's comms. He had survived the Gobi, though his body was now a map of silver scars, and his left arm had been replaced by a rudimentary prosthetic built from scavenged alien alloys. "A fleet from the Exodus Protocol. They aren't here for a summit, Anya. They're here to claim the motherboard." Anya looked at the horizon. Through the thick, gray mist, she could see the silhouette of a massive obsidian ridge rising from the ocean. It pulsed with a familiar, low-frequency hum. The others had fled, but they had left their infrastructure behind. The Earth was now a graveyard filled with the most advanced technology in the universe, and the Cold War had reignited with a terrifying new objective. Whoever decoded the obsidian network first would control the future of the human race, or what was left of it. As the icebreaker docked against the glass-like shore of Point Zero, Anya was met by a contingent of U.S. Marines. They weren't wearing the standard olive drab. Their suits were reinforced with iridescent plating, and their eyes were covered by visors that flickered with violet data streams. They were the new remnants, soldiers who had been optimized by government scientists using the silver dust captured in the Greenland and Gobi craters. "Major Sokolov," a voice boomed from the ranks. A man stepped forward. It was Colonel Jack Sterling. Or at least it was what remained of him. He had survived the collapse of Raven Rock, but his body was more machine and alien crystal than flesh. One side of his face was a polished obsidian mask, and his voice was a synthesized echo of the man Anya had known from the files. "You're late for the end of the world. I see the Pentagon has been busy playing God with the scraps," Anya said, her hand resting on the hilt of the obsidian shard she still carried. "How many men did you lose to make those suits, Jack?" "As many as it took," Sterling replied, his silver eye whirring as it scanned her biosignatures. "The strategy has evolved. We aren't fighting for ideologies anymore. We're fighting for the keys to the kingdom. There's a central hub inside this ridge. It's a direct link to the fleet's archives. Every technology they've used for 1 billion years is in there. We need your Shadow Watch encryption codes to unlock it." "And what happens when you have 1 billion years of weapons, Colonel? Do you think the Kremlin will just sit by and watch?" "The Kremlin is already inside," Sterling said, gesturing toward a second set of tracks in the silver ash. "They arrived 6 hours ago. They've brought their own remnant. A boy they found in a bunker in the Urals who can speak to the network. We're in a race to the center of the mind, Anya. If they get the codes first, they'll rewrite the history of the world before the sun even comes up." The Shadow Watch and the American remnants moved together into the heart of the obsidian ridge. The interior was a labyrinth of living crystal, the walls breathing with a faint, bioluminescent light. It felt like walking through the veins of a titan. As they moved deeper, the air grew warm and tasted of ozone. The psychic pressure increased, a heavy weight that made the unoptimized soldiers collapse to their knees, their noses bleeding from the sheer intensity of the ambient data. In the central chamber, a vast cathedral of black glass, they found the Soviet team. They were huddled around a pulsing violet sphere that was suspended in a web of silver filaments. At the center of the web sat a young boy, no older than 12, his skin shimmering with a metallic sheen. He was plugged into the sphere, his eyes rolled back, his mouth moving in a silent, tonal language. "General Volkov," Anya called out, seeing the senior Soviet officer standing by the boy. "Stop this. The boy can't handle the bandwidth. You're going to trigger another collapse." Volkov turned, his face pale and determined. "The collapse is already here, Major. The world is dying. The oceans are poison. The crops won't grow in the ash. Our only hope is to use their terraforming tech to fix what they broke. We aren't looking for a weapon. We're looking for a lung for the planet." "He's lying," Sterling roared, raising his pulse rifle. "They want the gravitational drives. They want to turn the moon into a kinetic battering ram." The tension in the room was a physical force. Two empires, both broken, both standing on the edge of a godlike power they didn't understand, ready to pull the trigger one last time. The Cold War hadn't ended, it had simply moved into the psychic realm. Suddenly the boy in the web screamed. The violet sphere turned a violent, angry red. The silver virus Anya had uploaded in the Gobi hadn't just scared the fleet, it had evolved. It was now a sentient parasite within the obsidian network, and it was feeding on the boy's mind. "It's not a library. Anya shouted, realizing the horror of the situation. It's a trap. The others left this node as a lure. They wanted us to plug in. They wanted us to give them a human host they could use to re-establish the anchor. The black walls of the chamber began to ripple. The multifaceted limbs of the others started to emerge from the floor, not as physical entities, but as shadows cast by a light that wasn't there. The silver virus was the bridge they needed to return. By trying to steal their technology, the humans had invited the hunters back into the house. The strategy was never ours. The boy's voice resonated, but it was the architect's tone. You thought you were the scavengers, but you are the soil. And the second harvest is starting from within. The obsidian ridge began to vibrate, a sound that could be felt across the entire planet. High in the darkened sky, the rift began to glow again. The others hadn't fled. They had just been waiting for someone to turn the lights back on. Anya looked at Sterling, then at Volkov. For the first time in history, the two superpowers were staring at the same nightmare. We have to kill the node, Anya said, her voice a cold, hard blade. We have to kill the boy. Sterling hesitated, his mask flickering. Volkov stepped in front of the child, his pistol drawn. The final choice of the Cold War wasn't about who would win, but about who was willing to commit the ultimate sin to save the world from a fate worse than death. The atmosphere in the obsidian cathedral of Point Zero was no longer breathable. It had become a thick, ionized soup of data and despair. The boy at the center of the web, the Soviet child remnant, was no longer a human being. His body was stretching, his skin becoming translucent, revealing the flickering violet circuitry of the obsidian network underneath. The scream he emitted was not a sound of pain. It was the dial-up tone of a dying god. General Volkov stood his ground, his hand trembling as he pointed his pistol at Anya. He is our only hope, Major. If we kill him, we kill the only translator we have for the terraforming engines. The world is starving. Do you want to rule over a planet of skeletons? He's not a translator anymore, Volkov. Anya shouted over the rising roar of the room. He's an antenna. Look at the walls. The black glass of the chamber was liquefying. The multifaceted limbs of the others were no longer shadows. They were physical appendages of shadow matter, reaching out to stroke the consoles and the soldiers. The silver virus, the psychic poison Anya had unleashed in the Gobi, had been repurposed by the network. It had been integrated, cleaned, and turned into a weapon that could bridge the gap between the rift and the human mind. The strategy of the others had shifted from external conquest to internal subversion. Colonel Jack Sterling stepped forward, his obsidian mask glowing with a dull, menacing heat. The Major is right. This isn't a library. It's a pregnancy. And that child is about to give birth to something that will eat this world from the inside out. Sterling raised his pulse rifle, but before he could fire, the boy's eyes snapped open. They weren't silver or gray, they were a void of absolute blackness. A wave of kinetic energy erupted from the boy, throwing Sterling and Volkov against the walls with the force of a high-speed collision. The American Marines and Soviet guards were lifted into the air, their bodies being disassembled into silver mist before they could even scream. Anya felt the pressure in her skull reaching a breaking point. The obsidian shard in her hand was vibrating so violently it was burning her skin. She realized that the shard, which had been at the heart of the Gobi explosion, was the only thing in the room that carried the original chaotic signature of the virus. It was a fragment of pure, unoptimized human defiance. Miller. Anya gasped into her comms, looking for the last member of the Shadow Watch. The frequency. I need the Gobi resonance now. Miller crawled from behind a fallen pillar, his prosthetic arms sparking. He jammed a handheld transmitter into the floor's crystalline veins. Unlocking on Anya? But the feedback will kill everyone in this room. It's a total psychic wipe. Do it, Anya ordered. As Miller flipped the switch, the room was plunged into a strobe-like nightmare. The Gobi resonance clashed with the boy's black hole frequency. The two forces tore at each other, creating ripples in space-time that made the very air seem to crackle like dry parchment. Anya watched as the multifaceted limbs of the others began to dissolve, their forms unable to maintain cohesion in the face of the discord. Anya sprinted toward the boy. Every step felt like wading through a river of lead. She could see the architect's face flickering over the child's features, a ghostly, multifaceted mask that was trying to solidify. The boy's mouth opened, and for a split second, a small, terrified human voice cried out, "Please, make it stop." Anya didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to. She reached the center of the web and drove the obsidian shard directly into the boy's chest, into the heart of the violet sphere. The explosion was silent. A wave of pure white light expanded from the point of impact, washing over the cathedral, the ridge, and the island of Point Zero. It wasn't a physical blast, it was a psychic pulse that reached across the entire planet. Every remnant, every soldier infected with silver dust, and every person still caught in the violet trance felt their connection to the obsidian network snap. The rift in the sky, which had been glowing with the arrival of the fleet, suddenly flickered and vanished. The moon-sized ships were no longer anchored to the Earth's consciousness. Without a host, without a shepherd, they were just cold metal in the vacuum of space. They began to drift away, their interest in the poisoned world finally extinguished. When the light faded, Anya was lying on the cold, black glass. The boy was gone. The violet sphere was a pile of inert, gray ash. The obsidian cathedral was silent, its walls no longer breathing, its lights dead. Colonel Sterling was slumped against a pillar, his obsidian mask cracked, revealing the scarred human face underneath. He looked at Anya, his eyes filled with a hollow, terrible clarity. General Volkov was dead, his body having been unable to survive the psychic wipe. "Is it over?" Sterling rasped, his voice sounding entirely human for the first time in years. Anya stood up, her body aching, her mind a scarred landscape of memories that weren't hers. She looked up through the cracks in the ceiling. The black shroud was still there, but through a small gap in the soot, she could see a single real star. "The invasion is over," Anya said. "But the world we knew, that's never coming back." She looked at the obsidian shard, now dull and lifeless in her hand. They had saved the human race, but they had done so by severing its connection to the stars. They were alone again. Alone in a world of ash, with two broken empires still holding the triggers to whatever weapons remained. "The files?" Sterling said, nodding toward the dead consoles. "We didn't get them. We have no technology. No way to fix the atmosphere. No way to feed the survivors. We have the dust," Anya said, looking at her silver-tinted hands. "It's inert now, but it's still here. We don't need their network to use it. We just need to find our own way to speak to it." Anya walked out of the cathedral and onto the shore of Point Zero. The Soviet icebreaker was still there, a lone spark of human engineering in a sea of alien glass. She knew that as soon as they returned to the mainland, the politics of the Cold War would return. The Americans would want to study her. The Soviets would want to execute her for the death of Volkov. The struggle for power would resume, even if that power was only over a graveyard. But as she looked at the silver ash falling like snow, she felt a faint vibration in her chest. It wasn't the hum of the others. It was something else. A new rhythm. A human rhythm. "The strategy has changed, Colonel," Anya whispered to the wind. "We aren't the curators anymore. We're the architects now." The icebreaker groaned as it pulled away from the obsidian shores of Point Zero, leaving the silent tomb of the Soviet and American dreams behind. The world that Anya Sokolov returned to was not the one she had left. The black shroud in the atmosphere had begun to thin, but the sunlight that filtered through was a pale, sickly amber. The Great Shift had permanently rewritten the geography of the superpowers. The Cold War was no longer a game of chess played on a map of nations. It was a desperate scramble for survival in a landscape of alien ruins. As Anya stood on the bridge, watching the silver-tinted waves of the Atlantic, she realized that the others had left a final, cruel gift. The silver dust was no longer a weapon of the fleet, but it was still part of the Earth's ecosystem. It was in the water, the soil, and the blood of every survivor. Humanity had been fundamentally altered. They were no longer purely biological. They were a hybrid species, a civilization of remnants, living in the wreckage of a galactic harvest. In the secret bunkers of the Nevada desert and the deep Earth cities of the Urals, the scientists were already at work. Without the architect to guide them, they were blind, but they were learning. They were taking the inert crystalline shards and the dead processors of the spires, trying to forge a new kind of technology, a technology of shadows. The secret files of Project Nightglass were no longer just military records. They were the new Bible of a world that had looked into the abyss and survived by becoming part of it. "The Americans are calling it the Neon Era," Miller said, joining her on the deck. He looked at his prosthetic arm, which was now pulsing with a faint, steady violet light. He had found a way to bridge his own nervous system with the scrap metal of the Gobi. They think they can control the dust. They think they can build a new empire on the bones of the others. And the Kremlin? Anya asked. They're doing the same. They've established a new, special directorate to hunt down every last obsidian fragment on the continent. The war hasn't ended, Anya. It's just gone into the DNA. We've traded nuclear winter for a silver eternity. Anya looked at the obsidian shard in her hand, the one she had used to sever the connection at point zero. It was dormant, but she could feel the potential within it, the data of 1 billion years, waiting for a mind strong enough to access it without being consumed. She knew that as long as this technology existed, there would be no peace. The humans would use it to build better walls, better weapons, and eventually they would use it to reach back out into the stars. We didn't save the world, Anya whispered. We just gave it a new way to destroy itself. She walked to the edge of the ship and threw the obsidian shard into the dark, freezing waters of the North Atlantic. She watched it sink, a tiny spark of black glass vanishing into the depths. It was a symbolic gesture, a rejection of the optimized future, but she knew it was a lie. The knowledge was already out there. The signal had been heard. And somewhere in the vast, cold vacuum of the universe, the others were still watching, waiting for the human ghost to grow strong enough to be worth harvesting again. The icebreaker disappeared into the mist, heading toward a horizon that was no longer certain. The era of nations was over. The era of the remnant had begun. And in the silence of the new world, the only thing that remained was the hum, the faint, subsonic vibration of a planet that had been touched by the divine and left to rot in the dark. The files are closed, but the truth remains buried beneath the ice and the sand. What you have heard is not a fiction, but a warning. The borders we fight over, the flags we wave, they are nothing but ink on a map that the stars have already decided to rewrite. We are living in the shadow of a history that was never meant for us to know. If you have felt the hum in the silence, if you have seen the violet flicker in the corner of your eye, then you are already part of the Obsidian Network. Do not look for the light, learn to navigate the dark. For more declassified accounts of the wars we were never supposed to win and the projects that hide in the blind spots of history, you must join the watch. Subscribe to Elder Merc. Turn on the notifications, for the signal is weakening, and the next harvest will not be announced. Share this file with those who are awake, and comment below with the word remnant if you have seen the silver dust. The archives are vast and the night is long. Stay hidden. Stay vigilant. Because the ice is melting and what lies beneath is waking up.